Hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. I having have had all the experiences I've had with life and death and bringing so many memories through and then counseling people with NDEs and even OBEs, I have found a need for people to understand the process. And I've taken it for granted, because it's just part of my life, right? I realized that it's not for most people, and so I just feel like if there's anything I can do to help people understand the process of an NDE, or even, what happens when you die and then how it just continues on. And we'll get into all of that, but I just feel like we need to take the fear away from it, and take the stigma away, for so people can talk about it, because there are so many people that have had these experiences, but they're afraid to say anything, to people. So that's why I'm here, trying to help make that easier for people to do. So we'll start off. I'll just share three of my personal experiences, things that helped bring me kind of out of, well, I was young, so, I didn't have a lot of, preconceptions, but for the first one. But then later on in life, we take on religious, social, and familial understandings, and that puts a lot of pressure on us, to follow that. And fortunately, I was kind of knocked out of that two or three times and began to understand what really was important in life. So that's why I want to share with you guys three stories in particular. The first one, just a visual for you guys. I was about 9 years old. I went to my friend's house in Southern California. So you can see it's always sunny and there's swimming pools, right? I went over there to swim. So we went outside, went out to the back, and I saw he had a slide. I said, well, that looks like a lot of fun. So I climbed up and I slid down. I was having a great time until I hit the water. And I realized I don't know how to swim. And I'm like, oh, this was not smart. So I thought, in my brain, I was thinking, oh, it's easy. I'll just get out of the water. Well, that's really not what happens. So I was coming up and trying to put my hands on the surface of the water and push myself out, right? Your brain trying to save yourself. Well, I did that probably three times, trying to get out of the water. And then I remembered my mother said something to me that previously, that if you see somebody go down three times, that they won't come up a fourth, because their brain gives up. And I thought, gosh, I guess that's true. So I gave up, because I just did. I just like, okay, I can't get out. So I just relaxed and I began sinking, um, began sinking down. And I was just looking straight up at these bubbles, right, coming out of my lungs. And the sunlight was hitting them and they were sparkling. And as I'm sinking to the bottom of the pool, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how beautiful this is right now. I mean, there I am accepting my death, right? And so I'm sinking down. And then I see this entity of what they had to be floating over the water, like looking at me. And so I just completely relaxed and then blacked out. Well, fortunately, somebody from the house came out and jumped in and pulled me out. But I could never figure out who or what who that person was floating over the water, because when they jumped in from over here. So that was my very first experience in accepting my death, and thought, wow, okay, this is really peaceful. It's not so scary to die, right? And so that changed my thinking in a way that I didn't even realize it had done. And what it was is just that maybe I'm not all just this, right? Not all just this physical form. So that was the very first experience. And it was sort of like this, I could just see somebody out there. There's not nearly as many bubbles, so I could actually see a form better. I knew it was a woman floating, so she had to be floating like horizontal above the water. So I don't know who it was, but I was grateful because it made me very calm. Then there was another experience. This doesn't bode well, does it? Does not bode well. Um, when I was about 21 years old, I would always get in my car and just drive for days at a time, just the wanderlust, right? So I drove to a large city. I lived in LA, but I drove out and I went out to a nightclub by myself and I was drugged. So, and this story is a little embarrassing for me, because it's demasculating. But I think it's really important to hear for people because it's not all only women that are trafficked. It's also men. And it's quite common, but men really don't talk about it. So I was kidnapped for like 2 weeks and taken to different homes for about 2 weeks. I was out of it most of the time because I was injected and drugged, and so that I wouldn't fight back and that I wouldn't run away. So after about, I guess it was about 2 weeks, I barely had a recollection of anything. But one day, it was in the afternoon, I remember just kind of opening my eyes and I was looking at myself on the bed. I'm like, this is strange. I think that's me. And I'm not dead because I could see my chest moving a little bit. So I knew I was breathing. I thought, wow, this is bizarre. And so I was watching myself. And then from my right, from the perspective of being outside of my body, I heard two men talking and they were discussing where they're going to dump the body. And I'm like, oh boy, this is not good, right? And so right after that moment, I snapped back into my body and I had my eyes closed and I was still out of it. But then I see this entity. It's just a shadow of just a human form, kind of leaning over me like this. And they're using their hands and they're drumming my face really fast and hard. And I'm like, well, stop. And it woke me up at what, and I thought for a long time that was like a negative entity attacking me, right? Turns out it wasn't that at all. It was one of my guides trying to say, get up, wake up. You got to get out of here. And then I heard somebody say, you must leave now. So that combination of things, hearing a voice and being slapped in the face repeatedly, woke me up. you know. So I got up and I looked around. There was a window, and I was able to escape. And fortunately, there was an ER nearby, and I've spent a couple days there. Of course, they thought I was lying about the abduction part, and then turned me out. And then somehow my car was still parked where I parked it, and I drove home. Um, but through that process, I began to understand there's something I need to pay attention to. There's someone that is communicating with me. They clearly saved my life, and I just got to see who that is. So I started searching. So that was my OBE. Um, and this, about 20 years ago almost, I was living in Palm Springs, California, and I was cleaning my front patio, which we did in Palm Springs a lot. And I slipped. My feet flew right out from under me, and I landed on my back and shoulders. And I'm lying there with my breath knocked out. And I'm thinking, wow, my back feels great. I'd aligned it. So I'm like, oh, it's not so bad. I think I'm okay. So I get up, and I finish what I'm doing. And for like 2 days, it was kind of difficult to breathe. And I had a friend call me a couple days later. They had been checking in to see if I was okay. So after the second day, calls and he's like, you sound really bad. I'm like, oh, I'm just having a hard time breathing. I'm fine, you know. So he said, no, I'm coming over now. So he did. And then about 5 minutes after he arrived, I couldn't breathe anymore. My lungs had filled with fluid because I had developed pneumonia because I wasn't breathing deeply. I'd cracked ribs and, machoed it out, and it didn't work out well. So I was rushed to the ER, and I was there for 36 to 48 hours. And there I am in just a regular room, and I'm struggling to breathe. And it got to the point that I kept talking to myself. I says, you don't have to breathe. You don't have to take 2 breaths. Just take 1 breath. It's like just cheering myself on, right? Because it was all of my strength just to take a breath. Okay, so I'll take a breath. Struggle to take it, but I took it. I'm like, fine, like acquiescing to myself. And then I'm like, okay, you did it. Good for you. Let's take one more. Take one more breath. Like, okay, you don't have to take another one. You don't have to take 2. You can give up after this one. Just take 1 more. Like, okay, so I'll take another breath. And I did that for 36 to 48 hours. Now, that was a really long time because every single breath was just felt like an eternity. And so what that did, because what I ended up doing actually, because became so severe, they put me in ICU, they intubated me, and you know, machines were breathing for me, and everything was by machine at this point. And I had just kind of given up. I was so exhausted. I couldn't imagine I could, do this for another moment. So when they put me on the machines, they induced a coma, and they put me under, and I managed to barely remember this. But I basically saw something very similar to this. I'm like, wow, this is like kind of cool. It's kind of scary, but kind of cool, right? Who doesn't want to be floating? I was outside my body entirely. I wasn't even on Earth. I'm not sure where I was, but this was my view. Now I understand they use propofol, and apparently you can do this with propofol, but you know, I believe there's a spiritual component to it as well. At least I took that part out of it. And so every so often this would happen. Oops, sorry. That should play a little video. Every so often in this darkness, a face would appear just like that, right here. And then I could see right around their face. I could tell they were in a hospital. There were nurses, there was machinery, but even though they were yelling at me, like screaming, and I couldn't hear a word, I knew they were friendly, right? So that began my journey floating through wherever I was floating, looking for that friendly face that's going to appear at some point. And that became my journey for 9 days, and fortunately, my grandfather, who died when I was 3 months old, so I never really met him. I knew he was with me the whole time. He was standing right next to me. He never said a word. He never moved for like that whole 8 or 9 days. So, there's something to that. And so I felt that comfort. So he was like an anchor while I was going through this out of body place. And so that made another connection that I needed, kind of resetting my life. And that's what it did. It completely reset my thinking and my brain. And I began to wonder, listen, these things I'm going through, they have to have some importance. It's not just some fluke, right? So I began to search, and I kind of figured out that the importance of life wasn't based in money. It wasn't based in what you have. It wasn't even based in what you don't have. It was based in people, that people were what was important, and people in your life and how you treat them. So I began to understand that. And then once I did that, then I began to hear voices a lot, not usually audible, but I could, like someone was speaking in my mind. And I found out later that was my guides and soul family. So that taught me a big lesson there because I knew my grandfather was there, right? So I was then open. So I began, a journey of self exploration and inner seeking for the truth. So at this point in time in my life, I was raised a fundamentalist Christian that was incredibly strict, really close to, being a Quaker, you know, um, but we didn't have to wear the clothes, So it was a very restrictive life, but it also was very judgmental, with things. So I thought this doesn't make sense. I couldn't make sense of what I was taught and what I now knew was out there, right? With some of the experiences that I had. So I just decided, I got to set it all down, you know, and that was not an easy choice, because unfortunately, a lot of religions place in judgment and fear of God. If you question anything, you're judged forever and you're not going to go to heaven, so don't question God. So I thought, okay, well, I got to kind of hedge my bet a little bit. I said, okay, I'm going to lay everything down. I'm like, God, if you're there, this is what I need to do. I need to just put all of my beliefs down and I need to start over and search for myself because I'm not going to take somebody else's word. I'll listen, I'll read books, but if it doesn't feel right, I'm not picking it back up. So I said, okay. And I said, God, if you're there, then I know you're smart enough to know this is what I need to do. And so I hope you're not going to judge me. And then I waited a moment. There's no lightning bolt, so maybe I'm okay. So that's really what I began to do is I just began to read all sorts of things, different religions and just different understandings. And then in that process, a lot of the beliefs I grew up with, I picked back up. I'm like, oh, okay, now this makes sense. I get this now from this perspective, because I began to learn, because, I've read the Bible several times, the King James Version, because I had to when I was a kid. And a lot of times I'd be reading that and I'm like, this kind of judgy, doesn't feel quite right. So then I began to understand that in the Bible, there are really beautiful, wonderful lessons and stories told in a way that is controlling and negative. So you take something beautiful and you twist it. Like like I often say, the 10 Commandments. Well, we all know we probably shouldn't kill anybody else, probably shouldn't steal from them. This is inherently stuff that we know not to do. But when you say thou shalt not, what you've now done is placed a negative twist on it. Because if one person sees that you've done something that the Bible says thou shalt not do this, now that person's judging that person. And that judgment creates dissension. And that dissension feeds the negative forces that put thou shalt not in there to begin with. And they're like, okay. So then I started rereading, like, oh my God, about half of this Bible is not great. So when you have that perspective and you reread some of these things, you're like, oh, all right, I can see the good message in here, but you'll take this part out. This doesn't quite work. So that was my journey for a long time. And what I learned basically was a soul family. I learned what a soul family was and how to communicate with them. It was a huge lesson. I learned that our soul family are our spirit guides, or guardian angels, ancestors. I also learned that these guides are beings from other dimensions, other densities, and even other planets that have been through this process, already. And most importantly, I began to remember who I was beyond this physical and why I was here. And I began to remember my mission, and those parameters began coming through. So I'm like, oh, I have an actual point to living here. This is kind of nice now. I learned that I had a set of lessons and goals for myself as well, things that I wanted to learn while I was here. Because, our soul is in most cases, at least many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years old, and some are billions of years old, souls. So if we come to a planet like Earth, we're here, we live 80 years. And when you're a million years old, 80 years is like nothing. So it's like whatever you suffer in that short period of time, if it enriches the soul that's a million years old, it's worth those 80 years of suffering. So in a broad sweeping scenario, that's worth the lesson. So that's why many entities incarnate is simply for the lesson they learn, because there's something that maybe they did in their last lifetime that they didn't quite get right. So let's try it again. And I learned, through this experience of my NDEs and OBEs, because I didn't know what they were. I began to understand that, so I was grateful for that. And with the NDEs, I began to seek, like, okay, what is the purpose of an NDE? Well, I'll tell you what I have felt for a while now, that every NDE is customized to the individual and their belief system. So no two people will generally have the same NDE. Because, basically our soul family, whenever we have an out-of-body experience or near death, or when we leave our body permanently, it's our soul family that come. And they can take a form of anything, a loved one, a deity, or simply light. Because it's basically whatever form calms you. Okay, if you believe you're going to see Buddha or Jesus when you die, that's what you're going to see, because that makes you comfortable and it doesn't challenge your thinking, because you don't need any challenges in that moment. You're like, this is bad enough, you know. So they're there, and that, these are who knows what they really look like, but this is the form they'll take to make you comfortable, so that you'll go with them. And it might just be a beam of light or a tunnel of light, but that's what you already believe. And also, they don't want to bridge your free will. They want to force information on you that you haven't already heard or believed or accepted. So if you don't believe in God, then if God showed up, you'd be like, I ain't going with you. Yeah, it's not going to work. So it's always very, very customized to the individual. And often OBEs are too, simply because it's the same reason. They don't want you to be too challenged in the moment. Now, many people have an understanding of the incarnation process and what a soul family is, and that many of them are from other worlds. And these people see their soul family for who they are when they leave. So if you already have an open mind and you're like, I don't know exactly what you look like, but it doesn't matter, then there's a good chance you're going to see them for who they are versus them putting on a persona for you in the moment. And this is my hope for everybody, to know the truth, about what happens, and that our soul family are the ones that we connect with when we die, and to accept it, of course, and that we don't have any surprises when we leave our body, because believe it or not, it's very much like, just taking off your clothes, dropping them on the floor, and continuing to walk. And that's really what leaving your body is. Of course, there are, exceptions to that, accidents and things where you don't even realize you just were killed. And then that's most often you're going to have a experience in that moment that somebody's there for sure to like bring you down, because, but then there are also times, that we have, well, I think I get into this later, so I'll skip it for now. So what is the soul family? I hope you're ready, because we're going down a rabbit hole. This little animation of a rabbit hole. So basically we're going to, quickly, a soul family, I see them as a backup team. You have an agreement with your soul family, and some of the soul family have incarnated, some have stayed back. So they're there kind of monitoring the whole thing the whole time. And they are the back of house. they're the ones being of assistance to the incarnate individual, because we all need it, of course, and then they're there throughout our whole entire life. They always assist in the out of body near death experience, and they really especially help us during the healing process while in the Devacan. And I'll explain what a Devacan is in a moment. And they're always there when we die. But as a side note, like I said earlier, these entities can be, another human. They can be another race. They can be from higher dimensions and densities. So you just don't ever know exactly who they are, because this is like you've chosen a family here on Earth. Once you've left your family you grew up in, you go find another one that's the same thing. We'll talk more about that later. Soul family is a chosen group of people we work with, often over many lifetimes. A soul family can be comprised of dozens of different races from throughout the galaxy or even the universe, as well as other dimensions. The soul family works with evolving planets to assist the inhabitants of that planet. That's like most of their group. It's like a group effort. They go help evolving planets and evolving races, which that's why there's so many, in our atmosphere now. And I can actually explain a little bit about what soul family is not. Soul family is not a native race. It's not an ethnicity, but the whole of a race, such as the human race. So the human race, or any race, but the human race in particular, because we're talking about us, we were raised up together on Earth, right? So we are varied and diverse. We're diverse because we're actually from a number of planets, groups that came. And so there's a lot of differences with this, what is part of what's made Earth a challenge, because normally, a planet has a single race on it, or maybe two, and so conflicts can happen in just differences in that way. But because we're all part of the human race, of course, there's the Starseeds or wanderers, and what they are. I don't know if you all know what we've all heard Starseeds and wanderers. They're basically the same thing. They're souls that travel from planet to planet, and in different dimensions and densities for experience or to assist that planet in some form or fashion. And we've a starseed is a being that's joined the incarnation cycle of a planet other than their own. So if you go to any other planet and begin incarnating on that planet, you are then a wanderer or a starseed, which many people, because we know starseeds here on Earth is other races that are incarnating, through the human race. It's extremely common. It's done on every evolving planet because they're there to help bring technology, spiritual teaching, any number of things. So why do they do it? Some do it strictly for the experience, to evolve their soul, to continue that experience of their life outside of the physical form. And some do it to be of assistance to emerging races of other beings, but mostly they do it for both reasons, and that's what many of us do and are here doing, because Earth is an evolving planet and the human race is evolving with it. And when emerging races evolve to the point at which we are here, they begin to experience a time of great change in understanding and enlightenment. I mean, even though we would all like things to move quickly, a little more quickly, and we all still see the dissension and division, especially in politics and religion, we see us fighting one another. That's what it's about. That's why those systems were put in place, so we would fight and not work on a spiritual level and spiritual path. We'd be distracted with all the BS on her. But we learn of higher levels of existence and that we're not alone in the universe. That's like the next big step for most people here on Earth right now, is accepting the fact we're not alone. It's not an easy one, but fortunately, there's a lot of us that kind of already are there, at least in accepting. And then once we've accepted, enough of us have accepted. And the good news is only about 1% of an entire population need to actually be, calling out, because they figure that it's enough to bring them down, bring the assistance in. But we basically just begin to seek and call out for answers, and that's usually through our soul, right? There's something about your soul sometimes that you're just like, you're reaching out to something, you're not even sure what that is. And that's a call to calling. And like I said, only 1% of the totality of the human race needs to call out. And then once we reach that point, and I keep thinking we're getting close, and then other days I'm not so sure. And when it's appropriate, there are many, many other races that they'll answer the call. And firstly, there are thousands and thousands of ships that surround Earth. Thousands and thousands. And they're literally waiting, because they're kind of outside of time. So it's like a short wait for them. Although some of them are kind of losing patience a little bit. But as soon as that 1% calls out, because, think about this. If there's not enough people that believe in this, when they begin coming down, they're going to bridge the free will of individuals. They're going to make people go literally insane, and that doesn't help anybody. Especially the human race. It's not helpful. Then you have the others that are going to start shooting first and ask questions later. So that's why they wait for enough people to be ready, so that they can talk to others and say, no, it's not an invasion, not in that way. But other ways that they answer the call is that they teach us. They'll literally, when the call has reached its pinnacle, all those ships will literally come to Earth and land at the same time. So throughout the whole of the planet, there will be lights coming from the sky and landing on the planet, So everybody will be covered. And they'll all be different races. Because some races, like, I think the US and America, we're just a huge mishmash of everything. But there are other nations that are from specific planets. And so they still have strongholds there. Just through the incarnation cycle, they keep reincarnating in those areas. So their origin race, their native race, will land in their area, so that there's a resonance there. And so they're like, oh, okay, I kind of recognize you. This makes sense. So it's a very thought out and planned, contact. But then once they're established on Earth, one of the things they'll do firstly is begin teaching us better ways of doing things than we're doing now. Taking better care of the planet and one another especially. And that's often through technology. That's through especially medical technology, because, we're a very unhealthy race and we have to get healthy again. That's part of our spiritual journey, is becoming healthy, because you have to treat your body with respect. And when you're not treating your body with respect, you're not showing respect to God or source. And as a side note, I often refer to God as source, because most races off of the planet refer to God as source, because God can be any God that we place in that position. Source is the original source that spoke all things into existence. So that's why when you hear me say source, I'm speaking of what we think of as the ultimate God. And also when we're ready as an individual, and we've done a lot of spiritual seeking and searching. We've gone through many of the lessons that have been brought to us, and we spend time especially working on the longevity of our soul, respecting ourself. Then what we can do, and this usually happens in upper fourth density, because, for those who don't know, we're technically in the third to fourth density transition. That's why Earth is kind of insane right now. For all of us that are old enough, if you remember, the sun used to be yellow. I mean, if you're too young, you're like, well, how'd the sun change color? Well, now it's white, but it's white because it's raised its photonic rate. And that photonic rate is what you would consider a higher vibration, and the photonic rate of the sunlight is hitting the Earth and the Earth is absorbing that higher photonic rate, and then it's emanating that, we're absorbing it. And so the planet and all of the beings, planets, animals, humans, are all evolving into a higher photonic rate, which is fourth density. And in fourth density, in the higher photonic rate, we have a better capacity in our brain to understand the higher spiritual lessons. So that's the purpose of that transition, as a side note. But once as an individual, we've gone through these lessons, and usually toward the end of the fourth density, which is like 100,000 years or something, then we can decide. We've kind of matured enough, and we can be away from our native race, the humans, and we earn the right basically to leave. We can go wherever we would like, but we can venture out on our own. Just go throughout the cosmos or visit other planets and do things on our own, because now we have the knowledge and the technical knowledge as well as the spiritual knowledge to manage working with so many different races and so many scenarios out in the universe that can't even conceive of without assistance. And so that's what that's about. And once we've learned enough, and we could either go out on our own, or we can join a group of other like-minded entities, people that have maybe a goal that you can buy into, right? Well, let's go to this planet and help. They're having difficulty transitioning from third to fourth, so let's go help them. You're like, yeah, I can do that. I'll go with you. So it's just like building your own family. And most of the time, we do join the incarnation cycle of that planet, because like with Earth, for the most part, from the best of my knowledge, there are no positive entities physically on Earth right now. There are indifferent and negative entities, because they're okay with abridging the free will of people. They don't buy into the highest spiritual understanding of leaving them. It's like waiting for the call. And because there's a difference in that. So I can certainly be wrong, but from my understanding and remembrance, there weren't a few years ago, let's say that. But we can also join the incarnation process, but we also become guides. So in that soul group, somebody else in the group might say, okay, I'm going to incarnate this time. And then you sit down and you make a plan. I want to learn these certain lessons. And then say, okay, well, I'll monitor everything. And then, if certain things, say if you have a goal of somewhere you want to be, or by the time you die, you want to have learned this lesson, and you're in the middle of your life and you're not looking like you're going to be there, then you put in your contract, that's a life contract, that your assistant, your guide, maybe you'll be in an auto accident, and they'll allow that to happen. Because that showing the projection, that's probably going to get you where you want to go, because there's something in that experience that you're missing, and this experience will bring you back, get you back on track. So we can actually be their guides as well. So it just goes back and forth. And then we also support other soul families. We don't have to stay in a single soul family. We can leave anytime, and they often do go back and forth. Like somebody has an expertise that another soul family needs, so they'll go over there and help them do whatever they need. But we actually choose all of our experiences. I know that sounds like you would never choose certain things in our life. I totally understand that. Believe me, I've had some pretty bad experiences that I would not have, being here now, would not have chosen. And some call that a life plan, when you choose all of your own experiences. And it's not to be confused with the soul contract, because that's different, and I'll tell you why. The soul contract and the life contract, what's the difference? Well, a soul contract is an agreement that we make with others, the soul family. Most often with the members of our soul family, but also with others outside the group. It's the plan we've set forth for our incarnation when working with our soul family to accomplish tasks and complete mission set forth by the soul family and its collective objectives. Okay. And then a life contract is the life plan that we make for ourselves. Often working directly with our higher selves. It's the plan for the experiences we have while incarnating, which includes the lessons we desire to learn. And if we're in a soul family, we have both of these contracts at play at the same time. They often complement one another so that the plan you've made with your soul family and the plan you want to accomplish for yourself kind of mesh so that both things are accomplished for you at the same time. And basically, that's how we learn most of our lessons is through our soul contract and our life contract. And of course, our life contract when we work with our higher self. But the reason we choose our life's experiences, because our life isn't random at all, and our life is beautifully crafted and customized. Our life is monitored and supported by our higher self and a soul family, and we're the center of every decision that we make for ourselves. And but we just simply forgotten, and we'll talk about that next. And how can it be that every decision about our incarnation, that we make every decision, but we don't remember? Well, it's a good question. We're beings outside of time. The only time that time actually means anything on a linear level is when we're incarnate. And it only exists in linear form when we're in an incarnated state, in a physical form. Since we're outside of time, when we're not incarnate, we can exist in a state of duality. And how that works is, well, we can experience an incarnate life on Earth, but we can also exist in the heavenly realms, monitoring our life and being of assistance when it's appropriate, or when we call upon our higher self for assistance. Our higher self is us, but from the future, from a higher plane of existence. And who better to make decisions for us than us, right? And us knowing everything that's going to happen, so that's when I understood that. I'm like, oh my God, everything I went through is not for nothing. I'm like, I had control of every decision I made. I chose it. And then when I figured that out, I was no longer a victim. I'm like, I kind of chose you to victimize me than if anything, right? And then when I began to understand that, I was like, oh man, so many things made sense. Especially because one of the things the problem I had with God as, some dude sitting up there on a throne was like, how could you let terrible things happen to children? How can you allow these things to happen? People suffering, starving. And then when I understood that free will is paramount in that level, and that individual, no matter how difficult their experience, they knew that they were going to have that experience. And they chose that experience because something about that terrible experience enriches the longevity of their soul. So it's worth these moments of some terrible experience because something about it we need to learn. So that just kind of freed me up. I'm like, oh, I love this, But why must we incarnate in a state of forgetting? Well, essentially, everybody has to be on the same playing field, level ground, right? It's unfair to have an advantage. But we'll go into a little of history about the veil of forgetting, as it's called. The veil of forgetting, was established millions of years ago by a very positive ancient race from the center of the Milky Way galaxy. Those planets and systems in the center of the galaxy developed first. So they have millions and millions of years on us in development, okay? And they figured out, because when they would reincarnate, they didn't forget their previous lives and the lessons they learned and all their information. They retained everything. Well, what that did, and they didn't have any negativity at that time. They were this particular race. They didn't have any negative members of their race. So what it did was it kind of made life boring, and there were no challenges. So they stopped seeking. They stopped seeking purpose of life and seeking to really, our goal is to return to source. So they stopped seeking this. And why seek when everything's already perfect? You found paradise, right? So they stopped seeking. And so they became complacent in seeking to source. They recognized this and that they needed to do something. So they placed in their planetary incarnation cycle the veil of forgetting. Now, as a side note, we've all heard about the Matrix, the movie series. Most of what's in the movie is not real, but the concept is correct. That, for example, Earth is a natural planet. If we weren't here, it'd look like it does, probably better. But what's because there's an energy grid around the Earth, okay? And so what happens is on a planet is you attach that energy grid, and you basically put a program, like a computer program, into that energy grid. So now you can incarnate your soul through this energy grid, and that's technically the Matrix. But that's what they did for their planet, and they created the veil of forgetting. What did the veil of forgetting accomplish? Well, they forgot who they were, or even that incarnation even existed. And this allowed for their imagination to flourish. And they began to create their individual stories and experiences based on what appeared to be all new information. They didn't remember anything now. So now they're learning everything for the first time. So now that whole free will aspect of their choices really comes into play now. And because of the new circumstances, they began to seek to understand the meaning and mysteries of life once again. Because now they didn't remember their source. They didn't remember that they can reincarnate. They didn't remember any of this. They're like, well, what's life about? Why am I here? And that's the seeking process. So life became exciting again, and they began seeking answers, in a higher being, which many of them call source. And secondly, the forgetting allowed for the emergence of a negative polarity. Now, that doesn't sound like a good thing, at first thought, but really it is. Because by forgetting who they were, or they are or were, they could now express their free will in the form of decisions and choices that went against others in their society. Okay, they didn't necessarily have to follow what they remembered for, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. We're going to continue that. Now they've forgotten everything, and now I'm going to do my own thing. So that's basically what happened. And they were no longer burdened by the obligations of the past. Of course, obviously, this created conflict. Like, why are you doing what you're doing? That doesn't make sense to me. Well, what you're doing doesn't make sense to me. So now we're fighting. And the conflict caused what we now perceive as negativity. Okay. And this negativity allowed for opportunities to have experiences that challenged them, causing them to once again seek the meaning of life and return to source. So it was all about getting back to source, all about continuing the seeking process. And this is, I just coined it the soul's noble journey that we're all on, us trying to return to source and an understanding that whether we remember or not, there's something much greater about who we are. And that when these circumstances in life come in, challenges, how you react to them dictates, your polarity, whether you're negative or positive, So that's the second thing. And it really turned out to be a good thing for that race. But we're talking, many hundreds of thousands of years. But who are these beings, and how did the veil of forgetting come to Earth? Here's one of them. This is an energy being. They were one of the original races. There wasn't just one, there was two or three. But they've pretty much evolved into energy now since they started this process, but they're still here helping us on Earth. So what they did was, well, actually, many people refer to them as angels, the ancient ones, God, or the watchers. Now, I resonate with the watchers, because I was fundamentalist Christian. So, it was the watchers in the Bible. Yeah, that was in Daniel, I think. Yeah. So the watchers are biblically from Daniel 4, verse 10 to 20. It means the wakeful ones are sons of heaven. They're a class of angels. They brought the veil of forgetting to earth to assist the developing human race. And humans weren't meant to remember their past lives either, because we're got a lot of negativity, just inherently, unfortunately. But all incarnating humans must be on an equal ground and have a clean slate when we're born so that everybody has an equal chance, right? Equal opportunity. And these experiences we have teach us and help us to remember the truth about who we are and where we're from and why we're here. Again, that's the soul's noble journey. This is the goal of learning who you are outside of this body, and then once you learn kind of who you are, you don't have to remember like your race or whatever, but it's just like, who am I, and in that process, finding love for yourself. And then at that point, trying to figure out, okay, why am I here? And then all of that is the seeking process. Again, the soul's noble journey is to live an incarnated life while remembering who we are. And the purpose of this is to seek to return to source or God. That's the goal of all material. And that's what a black hole, this is a side note, this is what a black hole is. A non-singularity black hole is material returning to source. A singularity black hole is material being recycled back into the universe in the form of a white dwarf. So that's what those are. And to have as many experiences as possible while you're incarnate, because all of your experiences, the reason Source sent everybody out to be individuals is so each individual is going to have a different experience, good or bad, positive or negative. They're all supporting the knowledge banks of Source. So every single one of us is, supporting that process, and then returning to that is basically our ultimate goal. And to learn as much as possible, of course, and then in that process of while we've forgotten who we are, we begin the seeking process in the forgetting is incredibly difficult. And that's why a lot of beings do it. And that's why a lot of them have come to Earth to do it, because the dynamics of Earth, I mean, it's notorious. It's known that Earth is really a difficult place to be. And they're like, okay, if you want to really advance your soul, you go to Earth. And so a lot of them do. But a lot of them actually get caught up because they get here and they don't, especially if they're highly positive and they've incarnated as a human and they see all this negativity, it makes no sense to them. They can get caught up and forget, even on a soul level, who they are. And now they're trapped in the human incarnation cycle. So that does happen also. Okay, and while incarnate, the veil of forgetting dissolves as we mature spiritually. So the more we seek outside of our comfort zone, the more we begin to try to understand more, then the veil of forgetting begins to dissolve and memories begin to come through. And as one memory comes through, like with me, some memories I never forgot, but I was told I was a vivid dreamer. I had great imagination, and I believed it for most of my life, but they never went away. These things I remembered. And so I continued. At one point, as I began the inner journey of seeking, suddenly these two memories that didn't seem related at all were totally related. Like, that makes sense. Suddenly I began to make sense of these fragmented memories that I was having. And that's part of the awakening process. Anyway, and ultimately that awakening process brings us to enlightenment. Which brings me to another story, personal story. This is the story of me choosing my parents and incarnating on Earth. So if you will imagine with me, there's Earth, right? If you imagine there's we're looking out through a huge window. There's a big archway. It comes down that way and a little short wall, not as tall as this wainscoting here. And so it's just all white. And over there is somebody standing at a monitor right next to the window. And so I'm looking at this view, and there's some people behind me, but I don't know who they are. I didn't turn around. And I thought, okay, we've narrowed it down to 3 sets of parents. Okay. That's going to be the US because there's a reason for it. I don't remember exactly. Probably because I'm not good at other languages, but I don't know. So I looked at the first set and I'm like, well, this will be a really great life. It'd be really wonderful experience. I won't be much suffering at all. It'd be really nice. But I probably won't learn what I want to incarnate to learn. So, okay, so no. Then there's the second set. It'll be a good life. There'll be some challenges and difficulties along the way. And there's a chance I won't learn what I want to learn. You know, I might, but I might not. I could get distracted and stop spiritual process. So no. And I'm like, okay, the third set. Yeah, that's gonna be tough. That's gonna be a rough one, that life. You know, and there's a really, really good chance I'm gonna learn what my goals to learn are while on Earth. And so I just threw my hands up and said, well, we all know which one I'm going to choose, you know, because I always chose the most difficult. And so I said, okay. And so I looked down where I'm standing. And this is how it works with my memories. I know there are many ways to enter an incarnation, different technologies, different races. You know, there are many ways, but the way I'm familiar with is I was looking, there's like a circle, probably about 1.5 feet around or 2 foot. It looked like emeralds, like a solid emerald or malachite or something. And on this round piece of the floor were 4 little bumps, you know, 2 here and 2 here, and they were gold. And from each one of these bumps was a lead, you know, built into the floor, like a circuit board. And they went up and they went, so say the circle's right there, then they went up to where that computer monitor is over there. And there was someone standing there. And so I knew, I was barefoot, that I had to put my feet on those 4 little bumps, one on the ball of my foot and one on the heel on each foot. Well, what that did was it connected me to that computer. I was now connected energetically to the computer. And that was how we entered the matrix on Earth, the energy field of Earth, to become incarnate. So what you have to do, at least with us, is you have to put your hands out. And that's showing that this is your choice. You're putting your hands out. This is my choice. I'm entering this incarnation of my own doing. And then I just closed my eyes and I began to fall forward when I was born. Right after that, I waited the very last second because I was already claustrophobic. And I'm like, it was actually, to be honest, it was terrifying. I was before I fell forward, I remember the feeling of I'm allowing myself to be buried alive because there's this spirit, right? You're a different density and being shoved into a little tiny solid object. Doesn't sound like a good fun day, you know. And so I remember that terror, which I thought was really funny that I would have felt terror at that point, but you know, it makes sense. So I closed my eyes and I fell forward. And then what I've now learned and remembered is that I'm still standing there right now, somewhere else in my other native body. And that this whole lifetime that I'm having, that you're experiencing and part of in the moment right now, is that fast. So I close my eyes and just begin to fall forward and then open my eyes again. That's my entire life of this lifetime. So that's how it works for the incarnation process of the group I'm with. So, but it's a very funny thing because I then began to remember doing that in the past, right? Having that process done. So it's like, imagine you're standing there, you close your eyes, you begin to fall forward, you open your eyes, and suddenly you're traumatized because you've had 80 years of experience. And you got to figure out how to process this in that quick of a moment. So what happens is, and the reason I tell this story is because it illustrates one of the ways to become incarnate. Now, most of the time, I know a lot of folks say when they, especially kids, that they say when they're born, they remember maybe God sent me down, or somebody sent me down. Well, that's one of their soul family taking that form, so because that's what their soul is going to need, to process it when they get to Earth. But it just kind of shows you that we regain everything when we die. We may not immediately because we have to go through that healing process because we're all traumatized. Come on, like every one of us at some level throughout our life, there's a lot of stuff we're going to have to process. So that's why the more we do now, the better off we'll be when we do leave our body. We won't have to go through so much healing. So what does happen when we die? Like I said earlier, leaving the body is as easy as taking off an article of clothing and just simply walking away. And the thing about it is we have to, when we leave our body, we have to look for something that, whether it's a family member or a deity or that tunnel of light, we got to look for that. It just doesn't pop up, because it's our job is to have that cognizance, have that understanding enough to look for it. There are exceptions, of course, but most of the time, it's up to us to look around. Usually it's behind you. And it could be or your grandmother. In fact, funny story. Before my grandmother died, because I've had other experiences other than the three I shared with you as far as NDEs and such. So before she died, she said, listen, when I die, I will not be your guardian angel. She said, I don't think I would have that kind of time, and she's outside of time, right? I don't think I can do this. Oh, that's okay, Grandma. I get it. No problem. So, it's all good. But anyway, so we have to look for something, and it's not just finding, it's also finding it from the heart resonance. Does that tunnel feel right? Does that person that I'm seeing that looks like somebody I love, do I connect to them? Do I feel that love? And then that's when for sure that's where you need to go. But you also may choose to stay because you're attached to a place or a thing or a person, or because you're afraid of being judged. That's what religion's about. Religion's a great place to start this soul journey, but it's not the end of the story. The worst thing that it's done is put in judgment, because now you've died, right? And you've done most everything right, or you were a terrible person. So you're like, okay, I'm not going into the white light. I'm going to get judged because we heard about hellfire, brimstone, and forever burning them. I wouldn't go. Come on, so that's what that was about. And the reason for that is that if you're lost on Earth, you're susceptible to negative energy. You're susceptible to being controlled by a force you don't want to be controlled by. And as long as they keep you trapped here, you're feeding them energy, and it's not ideal. It's just not ideal. But if you do go into the light, try to remember this when you die, okay? You can return at any point in time you want. It's okay. The first thing you want to do, you want to go through the healing process. That's the first thing you want to do. So, because what'll happen is you'll release all of the negativity, you'll release everything, you'll understand all your choices, and you'll have a new perspective, and that's what you need. So then after that point, and you want to come back to be supportive, and remember, you're outside of time, okay? So you can come back the second you left, right? So it's okay. So you're not going to miss anything. And then after we've left our body, what happens, if we're not attached to anything on Earth? Well, we'll leave the earth plane and enter the Devachan. The Buddhists call it the blissful realm, and we enter a Devachanic body. Now, a lot of Christians know blissful realm is heaven. There are many other terms for it, but it's a place that you go. There are many densities, throughout the universe, and many densities we have to work our way through over a long period of time. But the Devachan is sort of outside of all those densities. It's the density that's closest to pure love. Okay. And that's like the eighth density. So, if you're nowhere near there, you can't go to eighth density, but you can go to a sub eighth, which is the Devachan or heaven. And then what happens is, to interact in that realm, you have to have a body, to interact. So you go into a body that we all have, which is a Devachanic body, or you can call it a heavenly body, or whatever you'd like to call it. And that way we can go through the healing process while in that bodily form. And then, but once we get through the healing process, and what that is really is, we review all of our life choices. And there is no judgment. This is where judgment came in later. Is that you sit down more often than not with your higher self. Again, you're outside of time, so there could be two of you. And you're like, okay, you were walking down the street and you stepped over this homeless person and you didn't do anything to help. Okay. Why? I'm not saying you should or shouldn't have, but why didn't you help them? What was that purpose for that? And it's like, you have to figure that out. You have to figure out why you made that choice. And then that's the healing process. And you can do that, and you'll maybe review your life over and over and over until you can go through every choice you made, every choice that affects you, especially self-judgment, self-harm, and every choice you made that affects someone else in a negative way. And then once you can go through all of those, not feel guilt or anger at yourself, you're ready to leave the healing process, because now you began to understand it. And what this does is it supports your choices for your future, because there's a good chance if you kind of screwed a lot of things up, you're going to want to try that again in another lifetime. Give that another shot, and you're not, that's why there's no karma, because you're not made to do it. You've chosen to do it. Okay. So karmic action is just, you haven't forgiven yourself for it. That's why healing is so important. You don't want to take karmic action with you. So I have like dear friends that are like, why am I suffering this? What did I do in my past life that I'm having to live through all of that trauma and terror? I'm like, that's not it. You're trapped in that understanding and belief of self-judgment. And that's what you have to do, is let that go and understand that it's just a review of your life to help you make choices for your next, usually the next incarnation. And that's why it's important to go through that process. Wait, I went backwards. Okay. I don't know how long I've been up here, but okay. Um, I thought you guys might be interested in a couple of entities that I've encountered. I didn't think you'd say no. These are paintings I've done. So I don't have very many, because it's like, I don't have that kind of time to, I mean, I want to really badly, but it takes a long time to do these paintings. Here's one entity, and I'm terrible with names, even here on Earth. So ask me somebody that I knew like years ago on another planet, you forget it. But I will tell you a story with this guy real quick. I was in, like Susan said, I did work for and through the US Navy and the US Air Force. And from that point, I moved into working for the United Nations, off-planet United Nations. And there's a space station. There's stuff everywhere, I promise you, that humans are on. There's a space station outside of Saturn. And we know it and we see it as the first moon outside the rings of Saturn. It's called Mimas, M-I-M-A-S. And that's where I was when I encountered this individual, because my job there was, because I was very telepathic and empathic. So I would be there when they negotiated with other races, negotiated contracts, negotiated grievances. whatever the issue at that moment was. So I wasn't there negotiating the contracts. I was there to empathically be available for the other race. And often they would talk to me. This more often than not had nothing to do with what was going on. They're usually telling jokes, because they like to, because I would get in trouble if I broke, right? And I let her laughing, like always at the worst time, right? Talking about like with this situation, it was myself, my superior, and one other man at a board table, or I mean a boardroom table. And then this guy was right across from me. And there were two others, and then one standing behind him as like guard. There, like I said, there are humans kind of all over the solar system. A lot of them aren't nice. They've left Earth and they're like conquerors, or they're trying to do really negative things. It's not the majority of them out there, but so they're factions of the human Earth, the Earth humans, that are on space stations or on bases on asteroids, and traveling to other places and doing things that go against agreements. So there were some people call them the Dark Fleet. And this one faction of the Dark Fleet went to the planet of this individual. They wanted some sort of mineral or something from their planet. I believe it was quartz, because quartz is like the most commonly traded. Well, ships are the most commonly, but quartz is really valuable, quartz and gold. And these entities didn't want to give it to them because they didn't like them. So they just attacked them instead. They took it anyway and killed about 300,000 of them. So they came, because basically this was a series of embassies for other races. So they came, and because it was Earth humans, we had to meet with them and discuss what happened. Now, this race is not really emotional. They're sort of like, they're not totally a-emotional, but they really control their emotions. But when they get to a certain point, they'll just fly off. I mean, it's like, it's done. They can't help it. It's just like a trigger. Well, you can imagine what they're going through, right? 300,000 of them were killed. Now they're here trying, because they were convinced to come and talk to us. They didn't want to do that. They were going to come straight to Earth and cause havoc in some form or fashion. So we're talking to them, and this is interesting too. My superior, who I actually know who he is on Earth, he lives in France. He was not understanding enough for what they went through, losing 300,000 of their society. And so this guy didn't feel like he was getting it, right? So he's getting upset. So suddenly he just runs his hand across his chest like this, and I'm sitting directly across from him. And this beam of green light comes out of his chest and hits me in the shoulder. And then I could tell instantly he knew he lost it, and he felt really bad. So he just stopped. He stopped that beam of energy, but it killed me. So yeah, but it killed me. Now, fortunately, in these circumstances with certain people, I don't like to call them clones because there's a really negative connotation with that, but they were copies of many people, many humans. Trust me, they can clone. They've been cloning since the 40s. So there was a copy of me nearby because it's an embassy, right? So I was in storage. So they basically moved my consciousness and memory to a clone, and turned out okay, because I was sick for 2 days, which is kind of the process of the consciousness integrating into the nervous system. But because he felt so bad about killing me, they backed off. And then they were able to come to an understanding, so it worked out okay. I was, now that it's over, I'm glad it happened. Just cost me a body. I'm sure there's more, you know. But anyway, that's who that was. I thought you might be interested in this story. And here's another, this race. They're very interesting looking. They're only about this tall, but they have like a head shaped like a cobra, right? A hood of a cobra, but they have this nose proboscis of a elephant seal, but its skin, it's like it's softer skin than like an elephant seal would be. But these are shipbuilders. They build a lot of the ships that you see in the sky. You know, they're responsible for that. But yeah, and they're so loving. Just being around them is just wonderful. And there's some really, really funny ones too. Oh, you've seen this guy. Um, he's visits me mostly in meditation, but his resonance I feel quite often around. Now this guy, this is actually a person's name I remember. This guy's name is Jigadim. He's part Arcturian Andromedan. You know, they've crossbred before, and so he's in one of those folks. I knew and worked with him for 40 years, for a very long time. And another really loving, beautiful soul. So that's Jigadim, one of my guides, actually. I just wanted to show you his eyes. See how these eyes are just really colorful? If you imagine looking out into space and you're seeing gases in space, these beautiful colors, but they're dynamic. They change. Whenever they have an emotion or a thought, their eyes change color, but it swirls. And so I would be standing there just staring at his eyes. Couldn't help it. But they know, because they're like, yeah, they know so they're very tolerant. And this guy, you gotta love this one. This guy, they're from a planet that they evolved without any other races coming and screwing things up, unlike Earth. So they evolved very loving and positively. And as you can tell, they love Earth, at least he does, love Earth clothes. Well, I chose a Zoot suit, right? Pinstripe. You notice those glasses, there are no lenses in them. He just likes the frames. So I love this guy. He's super loving as well, and I think that's the last guy. Yeah. So if you guys want to, I have some videos on YouTube. You're welcome to write, that down, take a picture, whatever. Most of it on YouTube is about healing and about the process of using the device that I create. And so it's mostly that. But there's also some teaching stuff on there, podcast on there as well. And that's my company website. If anybody's interested, you're more than welcome to go there and just read a bit about what I create and what I make. Yeah. I do, actually. I knew somebody was going to ask that. But actually, the DEEMS we used, and the U.S. government uses these things, okay? They don't use them for what I use them for. I use them for healing and for chakra balancing and energy work. So it's really super beneficial. But they use them for more nefarious things because this is not electronic. Okay, theirs is electronic. They can program it. Remember what I said? They transferred my consciousness to a copy of my body. To transfer consciousness, the body that the consciousness and memories go into have to be an exact copy, vibrationally, frequency-wise, because the consciousness, the memory is all seated in the pineal gland, because the pineal gland creates an energy, piezoelectric energy. And that piezoelectric energy is the nervous system energy, the electrical system of our body, right? So we all have a separate frequency, like fingerprints. Nobody has the same frequency. So what they can do is they program the device they would use, and they usually have stones on them. For me, they use like a blue stone, look like a lapis lazuli. But they have a button on the back. They have this little pyramidal shaped stone, because I think the stone helps tune the frequency that you are at. So then they just came up when they wanted to transfer my consciousness. They put that right against my temple and push this button on the back. Now the device is now at the same frequency as my pineal gland, but it's a stronger signal. So the consciousness, the memories, everything comes out of the pineal gland and into the device. because it's the stronger of the two signals. And then literally they can just walk straight over, put it on the temple of the copy and let the button go. And now it's in the copy, the clone. It's that easy to transfer consciousness. It's super easy, frighteningly easy. So obviously this cannot do any of that at all. I promise. No, what this does, this is fully magnetic. This is a combination of the Ankh and the Baghdad battery. If you guys know what that is. The Baghdad battery is just, it's at least 2,000 years old. And it's just a little clay pot. Inside it is an iron rod, copper tubing, and like wine or something with electrolytes in it, water even. And then you put it all together, you seal the top, and it creates an energy, comes out the top. And that energy was part of the lighting they would use at that time. So it wasn't very bright, but there was a light. But also they used it for healing. So they would put this little pot, different parts of the body to help the body heal. Well, that the Ankh was used for many things, but that's one of the things the Ankh was also used for. So I combined the two in this, the measurements wise. Though I remember this being off planet, I just made it so that it could, I mean, it's excellent for pain relief actually, because it works, because it creates a piezoelectric energy. And that piezoelectric energy, what it does is it encourages the energy flow in the body. So if you have an injury or a pain and you just put this over it, it'll almost instantly go away. Sometimes it takes a little while. Like I had a toothache once and I was laying there for half an hour, had it laying on the bed and had it sitting there right on where it was pain. And after half an hour, I'm like, why do I make these? I'm like, I am defrauding people. I got to stop making these things. Like, okay, but I thought, let me try it for a little longer. 15 minutes later, that intense pain was totally gone. It didn't come back for 2 weeks, and then it came back a little bit, put it up there again. It went away after about 20 minutes and never came back. And I was able finally to get into the dentist. But many people talk, especially arthritic pain and stuff like that. But it also, because it has a piezoelectric energy, that's the energy of our chakras as well. So you can interact easily with our chakras and our nervous system. So that's why I created it. Because normally, we're supposed to be grounding on a daily basis, being barefoot outside. I mean, honestly, it only takes like 10 minutes or less, to exchange the molecules with the earth and the, not the protons. Anyway, another thing. Yeah. Yeah, for that to, to drain out and then the recharged negative ions. And so since we're not doing that every day, we're wearing shoes and in buildings and cars that are all insulated. This actually helps take the place of that. So it helps bring that same energy in because we're constantly drawing it in. So as I hold it, the energy that I'm bringing up through my body and through the left side is exponentially increased. So that gives my nervous system, my body, more energy to heal itself. So that's the purpose of this. Thank you for asking. So now I guess it's Q&A, yeah? Okay. Okay. Oh, sure. That one? Yeah, that's the YouTube. So um yes, ma'am. Hmm. Wow. Okay, it's super short and sweet. Yeah, it absolutely exists. You know, the so basically you're asking that why is say the US government, for example, is not admitting to anything but a tic tac flight, flying over the ocean, right? Now, come on, that's nothing. Because they're involved and they've been involved since the 40s at least. and they've had technology for that long. And so because they haven't been admitting it the whole time, there's a lot of entanglements. So they're not, and to be honest, a lot of people in the military want the information out, but it's, military echelon, you can't just run out and be a whistleblower without repercussions, right? Uh, so I would say the majority of the military does want it out, but the powers that be don't, at least not yet, for a number of reasons, because they've not been telling the truth. They don't know how to get out of the lie. They haven't finished reaping what they want to reap from the information, meaning more technology from other races, like the DEEMS. That's not Earth information. That's not from Earth. None of that is from Earth. It came here. And so they're still in that process. There are too many people on Earth that would freak. And so it would be like, that's again with the calling thing. If there's enough people that have an open mind and not going to start shooting, then they probably would say something. But they're just not there yet. But it's a process. A lot of sci-fi movies are backed by the US government, because it's soft disclosure. They're telling you the truth without telling you the truth, and then also to dissuade people from talking amongst themselves. They did what they call the Disney factor or the laugh factor, or and so they started laughing at people publicly. The government did, if they said something, so that shut people up. So, but essentially, as far as I'm concerned, they've told a lie for a long time and don't know how to get out of it. Yeah, a lot of information, like, yes, people do see things, or they have memories, of maybe experiences from another existence or whatever. And so that's maybe leaking through, or their guides are helping do soft disclosure through them, you know, and that happens like every single day. That's why a lot of the sci-fi movies are the way they are, because the writers, I was in the film industry for years. So I'd spoken to a lot of writers and producers. I'm like, do you have any idea how true this is? I'm like, seriously? They're like, well, no. They think I'm crazy. I'm like, no, really. When you were writing this, did you feel like somebody was writing it through you? They're like, oh no, but I know I had a muse. I'm like, it's the same thing. That you were being guided to release this information. And it happens in art, happens in film, it happens in music. All of that is guided. That's what I'm saying. This is not as random as it seems. Yes, ma'am. Tricky question. I can answer this. Okay. Remember that rabbit hole image? We'll go a little deeper then. So you're asking that other experience I had off planet, is it me or not me? Well, it is me, but I'm still there. Okay. I'm in two places because it is really easy to jump timelines. Let me tell you, it's all frequency. It's super easy when you have the right technology. So when I was taken and I went into the service in 1970, I was taken at 2 years old, and I was age advanced. So I grew quickly into like a mid 20s. And then I then they released my memories so that I remembered I'd agreed to do this before I incarnated. It was part of the soul group's plan because they wanted a representative on Mimas. But I agreed, or we agreed, that I needed to do 20 years for the United States first, so that, you know, that's what they wanted. So we agreed to the 20 years, and they would make sure I got to Mimas. So when I was taken, immediately, the moment I was taken at 2 years old, I was put on a separate timeline. So they beamed in from one timeline, took me and beamed back to that timeline. So that timeline's still running. I don't get out of the service until 2030, but I'm not there. So yeah, it's kind of a brain bender. So good question. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, when I was taken at 2, yeah, yeah, you're asking about whether my parents. Okay. Well, when I was taken at 2, so my parents weren't aware at all. What happened was, because when you're outside of time, you come back whenever you want. So I was in my crib. My mother and my aunt were both there and having um, interaction. And I'm in my crib, and this man in a blue suit appears and picks me up. Well, then I was taken, still gone. But then he brought me back. But I don't know why, but my mother and aunt were having a discussion about where I was. I guess now they figured out I wasn't in my crib and they're looking for me. Well, when they brought me back, they put me in a closet down the hall. So that's the only thing that they knew. It was just very few moments later. So somehow I got from the crib to the closet and they couldn't figure it out. Yeah. Otherwise they didn't know I was gone. So any other questions? Okay. All right, go back to UFO. Oh, well, I wasn't aware of that. But yeah, um, these aren't unknown to many people. Um, I would have to say, I mean, I'm not familiar with what you're referring to exactly, but you're talking about the gray entity, here, oh, that guy. Yeah, there are many species. This guy. And by the way, the reason I didn't draw his face is he asked me not to, because they have a very thick, say the chin this is down here, right? And the top of the chin is all the way up here. He's very thick, like really thick all the way around. So, and he has an angle to his face. So when he's looking at you, it's like he's looking down at you, and it looks really menacing and scary. Yeah. So he didn't want anybody to be afraid of him. So he said, please don't draw my face. I'm like, okay, I won't. But there are many species of what we call grays. Many of them aren't our friends, especially if they're on Earth, they're not our friends. Although I will say, because we are evolving from third to fourth density, that change in our planet, in our society, our race, many beings that are considered negative take advantage of that time and they transmute to positive. Because that's one of the things I do, is I help people let go of negative attachments. And I would say at least 98% of them all transmute to positive. Because eventually every negative being will turn positive. Because there's only one source, and that source is positive. So every negative entity's got to become positive. It's usually in the upper sixth density. But yeah. So because there are so many different variations on them, um, they're not negative. But the ones that, like I said, on Earth are, and a lot of them, you say they're all male. Well, they're really not anything, because mostly they're machines. They just look real. Yeah, many. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have, she asked if I ran across any of the blue people. And I said, absolutely, yeah. I've run into quite a few. In fact, they're the ones that help me recover memories. One of the races. Yeah, yeah, yes. The special. Oh, oh, well, a lot of us have heard of med beds, like, and when are they coming? What do they do? I'm building one, so we'll find out. Um, but a lot of that's one of the first things. Remember, I said when they come down that they begin to help teach us. We have to go to a certain level first. So in the UFO community, disclosure community, people are like, when are they going to bring all those med beds from the moon and drop them on Earth to help heal everybody? Well, that's not how it's going to work. We have to make an attempt first. Okay. We have to say, okay, I built, it may not be the best. It works, but it may not be as good as yours. But you have to show. It's like the moment we had nuclear technology, they showed up. That's when some positives definitely came to Earth because they were trying to stop us from destroying the atmosphere like many other planets have done when they figured out nuclear technology. And also, this is interesting, you might think, you can't really destroy energy except for in a nuclear blast or a blast that strong or stronger. So when a race develops nuclear the technology or energy weapons of that strength, they always step in because if a nuclear blast goes off and people are killed, it kills their soul. They're gone forever. So how does that work? I mean, we know we've blown a lot of people up, right? But this is why we really are lucky to have so many thousands of entities standing by and watching our foolishness. Because, for example, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when those bombs were dropped, because they're outside of time, they can take as much time as they'd like and need. Every single soul was harvested before the bombs went off. Not a single soul was lost. Now, is that not amazing? It makes me emotional. That's who's watching out for us. Uh-huh. Well, it's a really interesting question. Remember, we spoke of duality, that because we're outside of time when we're out here, so there can be two of us. When we are having memories of a past life, or we're having flashes, um, it can be a couple of things. It could be just a fragmented memory trying to come through, that's just there. Like I had a lot of those. I had to piece the puzzles together. Um, or it can be a communication from your guides trying to help you recover memory, get through a moment. And they're like helping you in that moment. So they're giving you a little, unlocking a little something for you. But they can't do too much because we got to do the work, right? Well, they can be of assistance. So that it could possibly be that. But when you mention having an experience in duality at the same moment, we've all had a deja vu moment, right? That's really interesting because a deja vu moment is when you're in duality and having the exact same experience at the exact same time. And you create a wormhole. And so you're connected to your other self just momentarily. So now I've learned to go, hey, Chris, can you hear me? For just a moment. And it hasn't worked yet, but that's what that is. So usually when you're synced in a lifetime, it's a deja vu moment. But they never last, you know. Yes. Well, Iraq specific, I've heard that. I don't know Iraq specifically, but I would not be surprised because of the mountains. There are many portals usually in mountains because mountains create scalar energy. Scalar energy is source energy. And so portals can be created, but because they're connected to the Earth's energy field. And portals often, wherever things cross, there are vortices of energy, which we call portals. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, Skinwalker Ranch is really interesting. To the best of my knowledge, because I did do some research with Skinwalker and talked to the owner. Um, and he explained to me a lot of what was happening. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally portals. That's certain because at one point they had a lot of mutilations from animals out there. So Skinwalker basically is an alien base. There's one underground and one in the sky. And the one in the sky we can't see because it's out of phase. So our eyes can't detect it. Also, you can't penetrate it because it's out of phase, right? So there's this massive base underground. What I told the gentleman Brandon that owns the property, I'm like, if you start digging down, you're gonna get a lot of trouble. They're not good guys. They'll collapse everything and you'll not find anything because they have technology to uh, like you squeeze a sponge. The sponge is still its material, right? The same volume, but you've compressed it. Well, they have the technology to do that to stone. So they turn on these generators and it just like creates a dome under the ground. Well, if they're invaded or something comes in, they turn them off and it closes back up. And you'll find nothing but a tiny thin layer. And so there's no evidence. But the beings that are in Skinwalker Ranch, there's quite a few. The main ones, there's a race of reptilians that they're the only true earthlings. They evolved from the hadrosaur dinosaur millions of years ago. They used to be on the surface of the planet, but because suddenly they became so many humans, they're like, nope. So they're the ones with the technology to create domes, and then they create an environment under the ground. But also the Earth is a honeycomb. So there are a lot of open spaces under there that they can create their own environment. So there's that group. But there's a fairly negative gray alien element in that base. They're the ones that have well, actually, there's two really big ships. One is alien grays and other is U.S. military. They're both because they have the technology to be out of phase. So they're both there. So you have the alien grays that really are not our friends. You have the hadrosaur dinosaur reptilian race that really aren't super bad, but I would not go knock on their door because I'd be lunch. So I wouldn't knock on their door. Then there's the much more negative reptilian race. They're the ones that helped develop the human we know today, and they wiped us out 6 times. They're the Anunnaki. Yeah. And so they've wiped us out 6 times. This is the 7th incarnation of humanity. Fortunately, we've been approved every time. But now, because of all the damage they've done, there's all the very positive races that are here to make sure that we're not wiped out again. Not in the same way, anyway. we're kind of doing it ourselves. But so there's those three races that are at Skinwalker Ranch underground. But then also there are second densities. So it's like, imagine an animal that doesn't have a lot of consciousness, so they're not going to be your dog. They're not going to cuddle up to you. They're going to like eat you, kind of a mentality. So they're a second density, but they don't have physical bodies. So they live mostly underground and in caverns. And they live pretty much anywhere where there's a lot of vortices or portals in the energy grid, because they can travel through them because they're non-corporeal. And this is, as another side note, this is where cattle and other animal mutilations come in. Firstly, it can be the US government. It can be another race of aliens that use the material to create other biological material. But mostly these are second density beings that have no body, that want to have a body on Earth. So they harvest certain material because they have the ability to manifest, which we've forgotten that we can do. They can manifest physical material. So they turn that physical material into a body. Like with Skinwalker Ranch, one of the stories is there's this giant wolf they shot, and they just stood there looking at him. They kept shooting it, knocked flesh off, and he's just like, whatever. That was a second density entity that created a wolf form. And so like, because as soon as that chunk of flesh flew off at Skinwalker, it was rotted. So those bodies don't last very long. So that's a big component of Skinwalker. Yeah. Well, I told him, I know he knows because I said it. I'm sure he knows from others. But yeah, I think he kind of thought I was crazy a little bit. But like I told him, this is, and I don't say what I say to be believed. I really don't, because I'm going to go home anyway and I'll be me. But I do say what I say to be heard, because sometimes even if you don't believe something, later on, something's going to click and you're like, it doesn't matter if you remember where it came from. I don't care. The fact is it's in your brain, and there might be something, whether it's a moment of your death or there's some experience you're having. You're like, oh, wait, this makes sense now because I think I've heard about this. That's why I speak out. It's not to be believed, it's to be heard. So, yes.
And plants that live with us.
Mm-hmm.
Where
That's really an excellent question, because it depends. They're plants and animals are all second density. Okay. What happens is we start off, believe it or not, as an extremely basic consciousness. Like we're a single cell amoeba, and all we're looking for is light, food, and reproduction. There's nothing else there. Okay. That's first. That's beginning of second density. First density is the materials we're made of: iron, cobalt, copper. Second density is, beginning of it is that very base consciousness, but you move up through it. So you have very many rapid lives in second density at the beginning. Then you become more and more intelligent till ultimately you're, say, a wolf or something in a pack. And then that wolf suddenly realizes it needs others. So they're in a pack, right? So it's not just them. They realize that they're not the only thing existing on Earth. And then after that has happened, maybe they look in water and they recognize who they are, that's them. Once they know that that is what they're seeing, that they have an individuality, then they're eligible to be a human. Okay. That's why so many, I laugh about this. That's why so many people are like, you acting like an animal. I mean, like, really, I mean, everything about you is like acting like, well, they're probably their first lifetime as a human. So yeah, you're going to act like an animal, right? So that's the progression. And then now in our human third density form, because once you're able to be human, you're in third density. Okay. Now that third to fourth density, now you become superhuman in fourth density. I'm talking about manifestation. I'm talking you can fly. I mean, everything. That sounds like superhero craziness, but it's real because we have the ability to manifest anything. anything that we desire. So that's the fourth density phase. So plants and animals in second density, depend where they're at in that second density. Um, and many trees do have a consciousness. And I have not publicly said this, but I'll say it tonight. Don't know why. I remember being a tree. And I just remember how wonderful it was. Because you're not conscious at the beginning. You have to be, the tree has to kind of get to be big. That's why every time I see people cutting down a really big tree, I'm like, oh my God, they actually have a consciousness, you know, but they're okay. It's just I feel bad about it. But I remember standing there, I was on the side of a mountain, and it was like a big pine tree or something. I just remember how much I enjoyed. There was no sense of time. Just enjoy the wind, and I enjoyed the rain. I even liked the snow. I just remembered standing there just loving life. How it ended, I don't know. It's probably a forest fire. But animals, plants especially, have the ability to leave much more easily than we do, because we put thought into it. We complicate everything. Eh, To leave, their soul can leave. And there are actually, I think in South America, there's a palm tree that walks. It walks very slowly, but it does walk. It picks up its roots and moves it over and puts it back down. So if it doesn't like where it's at, it moves. Takes several months to go a few feet, but so you got to say, probably have a consciousness, you know. Yeah, and so they're probably and there are races that evolved from plants, from trees, and so they come to Earth to be of assistance to the plants. So it's really kind of a wonderful scenario. Yes, sir. If I ever had an attempted carjacking, I don't believe so, unless I blocked it out. No, no. Oh, I see what you're saying. Not an actual carjacking. Has my soul had a? Oh, sure. Um, I my favorite way to meditate is on a treadmill. Okay, you kind of lock your body in to emotion, and there's a rhythm to it. So then I can kind of leave, and I just go wherever I want to go. That way, I get a really good workout, and I'm not even there, and so I'm like flying all around, right? So this one particular time, I was in a treadmill. I was actually in a gym, so you know, I'm glad it didn't turn out badly. But there I am. I've been there for a while. I was totally in meditation, and I imagined myself just rising out of my body because I could, you know. So I'm there, and I'm like, I would say I'm about where my knees are. My knees are about here, and I'm like, oh wait, I'm leaving my body. Oh yeah, let's go. I'm like, I'm done. Let's go. Let's go. Because I remembered all the wonderful parts of not being in this body. And so I just started to move on. And then suddenly I felt like a palm of a hand, really large hand, slap me and just like bam, right back into my body. And I'm like, oh, I was so close. But yeah, I've had a spiritual smackdown. Yeah, it was not great. But I learned my lesson. Yes, ma'am. Most of my memories are very short, so like a lot of social stuff, I don't bring in. So as far as the blue beings that I do remember, I remember my interactions with them, and also because they specifically put little triggers in my brain to help me remember certain things. A very quick little story. We were on Mimas, and I was standing there, and there was four security with me, a woman and three men, and I found her, by the way. So I know who she is now on Earth. I've been looking for these people for a long time, so I found two so far. And then I asked them to tell me the story if they remember something, and they corroborated everything I said. I'm like, it is you. Hi, you know. So that's really nice. So anyway, we're there talking, and we're talking about. We were outside of like a convention hall. Okay, there's beings going in and out of this doorway to the right. There's a big balcony, and it's like a giant mall. You know, just floors and floors and floors of space, and just entities everywhere. And we're sitting there talking to one another because we're all Earth humans. And we're like, it's such a shame that we can't share our story when we go home. It's like so sad that we experience all this amazing stuff and we can't say anything. You know, and if we did, people think we're crazy anyway, because that's how the establishment set it up, right? The laugh factor. You tell a story, they'll laugh at you, you won't tell it again. So we're standing there talking, and uh, and I spoke up. I said, well, I'm going to remember. And then one of the security right next to me, he's like, no, you're not. Oh, yeah, I'm going to remember. He goes, no, no, you're not. I said, I'm telling you, I'm going to remember. And just as I said that, there are these three blue entities, these three blue beings coming out of the doorway. And I could see them from my peripheral vision walking straight toward me. But they were, I believe they were clones. There was a female and two men. They all looked pretty much the same, unless they were twins. The female did look different than the men, but not much. And they were very blue. Their skin looked like, you know, frog skin is sort of translucent, but it was blue and sparkly. Really really beautiful skin. And they have this white hair, it's just parted. It was all exactly the same. This hair, white hair is parted right down the middle, came straight down. It was about to here and just cut off, you know, straight. It was like no nonsense kind of hair, but it was pure white. And so I'm standing there. I say what I said about remembering. Then I see them coming up right here, and I turn, and he tells me telepathically, he says, and I know you will remember now. I'm like, okay. So that's why that's one of my, that's the one memory that I never forgot, you know. No. Yeah.
Yeah, fine.
Oh, yeah, they're like tattoos that are yeah, but it's bioluminescent tattoos is what that are. Those are. Yeah, because it's part of their chakra system. I don't, I'm just so bad with names. Yeah, I wish I did. You know, I'm just, but I'm visual. I'm an artist, so I have visual, and so I remember everything visually. You know, but yeah, there I don't remember them being negative at all. Most, I would say, 90% of all beings are not negative. They may be indifferent and barely tolerant of humans. You know, because they think we're kind of idiots, which is not entirely wrong. But yeah, they're. I don't remember anything negative about them whatsoever. Yeah. Say again. It's very possible. A lot of them do cross over, do DNA, you know, interbreed, you know, because humans, we're already part of 21 separate races as a human being. So we're easy to genetically manipulate because we're already so many different races. Yeah. Yes. Mm, sorry. There are several species of blue people. So that's why it's so hard because there's quite a few. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And then again, it's interbreeding too. a lot of the males interbred with female humans and created other races that way too. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, what your thoughts are on like the distressing near-death experience. What happens
And the
there?
distressing ones,
Yeah,
like bad experiences.
yeah, exactly.
Like I said, it's even bad out of body or near death experiences have a purpose. For example, when I was drugged and then the entity was slapping me in the face, I mean, that's not fun, you know, but it was for my best being, well-being. So when you have a negative experience, it could be one of a couple of things. We all have, and people don't always like to hear this, but we all have or have had or will have, every single one of us, a negative attachment in our life. Some of us have had a lot. Some of us have had maybe one or two, but we all have, myself included. It's just because we're on Earth and it's part of the experience. Okay. So it could be a negative energy that is trying to terrify you or frighten you in some form or fashion, because when you're vibrating in fear, it's like a power plant. They love that. They just take it in. This is why when I work with people to rid negative energy, negative entities, and because of especially religious upbringing, we were taught, rebuke, send them to hell, send them back where they came from and yell at them and be the powerful one. Like, oh no, that's everything they want you to do, because you're creating a negative energy and they're feeding off it. That's why they end up laughing at them half the time. They're like, you're an idiot. You don't even know what you're doing. So what you have to do is send them love. That's the only answer. Send them love. You don't even have to mean it necessarily, of course. But I've had them pop into my room in the middle of the night, right? That's pretty scary. You wake up to see his face that looks like a really angry Sasquatch or something, scowling at you. But what I learned, and when I finally learned the lesson, that stopped. And the lesson was send them love. Don't rebuke them. So that could be that they're trying to frighten you, because it's most of our attachments are hereditary. And that comes down through the family because it's easy, you know. So a lot of times it can be that they're just continuing the hereditary process of negative energy attachment in your family, or maybe they could be brand new, it doesn't matter. They're trying to create fear, confusion, so they can control your actions. So that's a possibility. The other possibility is that it's your guidance, creating a scenario that creates you thinking on a level or a situation to bring you to a higher understanding of something. So that's why I always say, look at why you're experiencing this. As bad as it is, why? Why? Because you chose it. Why did you choose this experience? Is it because you need to grow your soul? Now, my parents didn't have love to give. They were good providers, but they didn't have love to give. Not in the way I needed. Let's just say in that way, okay? So why did I choose that? I wondered for many years, why did I choose people that don't have a capacity for the love that I kind of do? And so I didn't understand it until I understood that if I didn't have that love handed to me, I began to seek for it, right? Seeking source. So then I learned to find the love within myself. Okay. So all those times that I was so sad because 20 some years go by and my mother hasn't called. And it's okay, because I chose that scenario. They're doing what they can at their capacity. And that's wonderful, so you can learn to let that stuff go. So there's generally always something in it to enrich your soul, even if it's a negative entity coming in. Most of the time they're allowed to come in because it was either pre-chosen or because there's something in it that's going to help you move on for from something. So hope that helps.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm fine. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
all the ancient civilizations and all speculation. Science. Sound energy is in the
Yeah.
arrows.
Right.
All these things.
Well, it's an innocent question that is tremendous. So I'll do my best. The question being about ancient technologies, ancient civilizations, and how it relates, especially through sound resonance and balance and such as that. Very quickly, there have been pyramids on the earth for hundreds of thousands of years. Most of them are either on the bottom of the ocean or worn down or they're gone. The purpose for pyramids, well, first of all, about the ancient civilizations, there have been, I said we were the seventh incarnation of humanity. We started, but we were very much second density beings at the time. We started being adjusted genetically by outsiders over 3 million years ago. Okay. And then we would get out of control. They'd wipe us out. They'd try it again. We get out of control. They'd wipe us out. I mean, we're humans. So many ancient civilizations, they are so gone that we have no idea because the continents in 3 million years move. The ocean takes a lot of civilizations, so there's a lot of stuff we're not aware of. So those ancient civilizations always brought technology from off planet because a lot of beings would incarnate through these humans and bring, especially like in Egypt. Now the Egyptians were actually the Atlanteans. Then they moved, one of the places they moved was Egypt, and they brought their technology through remembering their Atlantean technology. But as we know, Atlantis is not visible anymore. It's the Bimini Roads, part of Atlantis, all the way to Cuba, past Florida. That all sunk into the ocean. In fact, the Bermuda Triangle, the reason it's what it is there's a crystal pyramid. I say crystal, it doesn't mean it's clear, it's just made of a crystalline structure under the ocean that the US Navy knows about. And it's still working and putting energy, focusing energy from the earth and sending it into the sky. And so that's one of the things about the Bermuda Triangle, why everything goes crazy, technology. But most of the pyramids are pyramids to do just that, focus Earth's energy grid. Because the stronger the energy grid of the Earth, the faster we evolve as humans. That's why I like the DEEMS, because we're bringing in a lot of energy, that same energy that we need to evolve. So we are moving, through this experience of energy, an evolutionary process. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So sorry about that. Yeah, the ancient civilizations. Oh yeah, the most of the pyramids that we see today are focusing that energy, not like they used to, because the Earth's, everything's changed. The magnetic field, the energy field of the Earth is different. So it's not really working the way it used to when they were new. It's like a piano out of tune. But they're to send energy up into the Earth atmosphere, like ley lines, which is electronic or electrical connections of the Earth's grid, because it's protecting the Earth from, because I know there's a lot of negative entities here now, but they were here when this grid went up. They were trapped here. But so new ones can't come in, but the old ones can't get out either. It's kind of a double-edged sword. But so most of those pyramids were for going up into the atmosphere, like Tesla did, the work that Tesla did to move energy in the sky. That's what the pyramids do. Now there's other pyramids, like the Great Pyramid, for example, was built for spiritual teaching. You know, we know this, they're not originally called this, but you know, the Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber are in different levels of the pyramid. Well, the queen, you know, you have to envision a pyramid shape. The Earth's always putting energy out. That's why we need a ground, because we're connecting to that. We're taking that in. But when you have a large pyramidal shape, you have a lot, that's why the angle is that way it is. You have a very large base. So it's much energy as you can gather, and it spirals and goes up the pyramid, right? Even though it's solid, it flows through material, and the shape itself contains it, not the stone. So it goes up, and as it's going up, it's condensed because it's getting smaller and smaller, right? So it's moving up, and when it hits the tip of the pyramid, it's like as condensed as it's going to get the energy. Okay, and then that goes off, supports the energy grid, and is used that way. Well, for spiritual work, the density of that energy as it's spiraling, you know, when it gets to the Queen's Chamber level, that is for physical healing. That's the vibration and frequency of physical healing. At that shape, angle, and size of the pyramid, the Queen's Chamber will heal you. If you go in there, whatever you have wrong, it'll heal you. They don't tell you that. And as the energy continues up to the King's Chamber, that density of energy heals the soul. Okay? So you can connect with infinity in the King's Chamber. And that's how priests at that time were taught. So I hope that helped. Yes. It's a heart resonance thing. Again, at a time like that, I would call for my higher self. The higher self always comes in. I can't say that they're going to pull you out of a jam, but they will be there, and then you'll at least understand why you're there. So you're there for a reason. It's never random. That is very possible. I will tell you, when a negative entity, we all call them demons, but it's just so not exactly correct. But when a negative entity or negative energy wants to transmute, see, the negative polarity is like a military echelon. You have your privates, you have your, you know, captains, you know, you have your echelon, right? You don't do anything you're not told to do, okay? So when you first get into this echelon, you're like the lowest of the low. So you're doing all the dirty work, but you have to do it, because what the goal of the flat out, the goal of negative energy is to collect positive energy. That's, if they wasn't collecting energy, they wouldn't even be here. That's because they can't create the energy they need to survive. They have to get it from us, from positive. Okay. So because they're under, and they're enslaved. So if a negative entity is bothering you, there's a really good chance they don't even want to be doing it, because they're enslaved. So, but they can't let on that they don't want to be there. Okay. Because they'll get basically energy beaten. So a lot of them that when I work with them, they'll come in and tack me straight on, but I know I give them a choice immediately, transmute. And maybe it take a few minutes, but I've never known an entity not to transmute, because they don't want to be there either. So, but they can't let on. So they don't want to be there. I mean, even though they all know it, you know, and there are some, I'm sure, that probably do. You know, I'm sure Hitler didn't turn anything down, you know. So, you know, That's no small question. Um, the Galactic Federation, they're the good guys. They're also, I mean, I remember them being called, um, I call them brain dead, um, the Coalition of Planets. That's the term I remember, but it's the same group, and they're the ones on Mimas, and they're on another few other places but I've never been that I recall to any other stations. But yes, because what happens when a race is ending their fourth density experience, and like the individual can leave at that point, leave the planet, leave the race, whatever. Everybody can leave if they want. Okay. So many of them, as a collective race, decide to move on and go help another race that's evolving. Okay. Because if you're positive race, that's what you do. You go help your neighbor, help them evolve, because you learn a lot in helping them evolve. So that's what you do. As an individual, you can choose not to, but that's fine. There's no judgment. Um, and I've lost track of the question. So sorry. They still can't interfere too much. Um, for an example, when we created the nuclear bomb in the United States, negative entities gave that technology. Okay. So because there has to be balance on the planet, the Federation came in, went to Russia and gave it to them too. That's the only time they interact, is if they must interact on Earth to keep balance. So it doesn't sound like, but the knowledge to build it. Yeah. Oh, the cabal says. Well, I mean, there's very little they can do because we've accepted it. It is our job, because there's a difference when, okay, say a highly negative being incarnates through humanity, right? Well, now it's a human actions. Okay, it's not the reptilians' actions, because they're human and they've gone through the process. That's why it's important to reincarnate into a race, because there's no real rules at that point in time. You can choose to do anything you want, and it's not abridging the free will of the race, because you're living the race. So the cabal has incarnated through, so they can't really step in. They can do things to make it better, to lighten it, to stop certain small aspects of it. But got to be honest and tell you, there's a lot of people that talk about our savior's going to come down and take down the cabal and all of that. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry. We have to be. Yeah, that's our job. That's part of our, as a race, soul evolution. We must, like I said, before they give us really good med beds, we got to build one ourselves, build them here on Earth, and then they'll help later make them better. It's the same thing, because if we can't take care of that, we don't need to be off planet. We don't need to be, we haven't learned enough yet. So that's why they're limited at what they can do. Yes. I have not. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. What did he find anything? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow. Interesting.
Thankful. We got one more.
Yes. They will once we've achieved enough understanding and we've all accepted the fact and we're not all fighting amongst each other and there's no danger for them to come down. Yeah. Yeah. So so they don't see that as saving or interfering because then we've called them in. Enough of us have called them here. And so now then they could land and interact. But we haven't called, not enough of us haven't called them yet. No. Thank you. Thank you very much. No, thank you. Sure.